Hello and welcome to the Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games interview series. I'm your host, Aaron Spelker. Now, Apple, iPhone, iOS Voiceover Compatible Games is a group that is focused on all things about gaming accessibility. And through our interview series, we speak to game developers as well as accessibility influencers about the state of accessible gaming. And today we have a game developer who has created several games across several different genres. And I'm going to introduce him. His name's Marcel, and he's from the Coding Monkeys. Welcome.
Hi, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. So Marcel is calling in from Germany. I'm always fascinated by modern technology, that we can have these conversations and meetings from around the world. And he is, as I said, is at a company called the Coding Monkeys, and the Coding Monkeys has created several different games. Some of them you may have seen in the reviews that I've done. A card game called Lost Cities, a puzzle game called Rules, a real-time text adventure called One Button Travel. So Marcel, I always kind of like to just start off having you just tell the group a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got it started in gaming.
Yeah, sure. I started I started developing games in 1997. This is my 25th anniversary, but I started with board games and card games.
Okay.
And maybe this was the reason why I got interested in accessibility, because back then in the 90s, there was a big discussion about color blindness and how to deal with that, because all the games, the traditional games, have the colors yellow and red and green and blue, and red and green were always a problem.
Right.
And so we talked about that a lot and tried to invent mechanics to circumvent that, using symbols on the boards of the board games and stuff like that. So I got aware of accessibility issues quite early in my career.
What were some of those board games? Were those, big franchises like, the Monopolies of the world and Risk, or was that, some, smaller indie type of board games?
Oh, I don't think that the term indie is what was that common back then, because I published games at Ravensburger and Cosmos and big publishers, Hans and Glück, but yeah, smaller publishers too. So that was all over the place. But we did Transamerica for Rio Grande Games in 2001, I think, and it was very important that there are clusters of cities. It's a train building game across America, and there are clusters of cities, and it was important for me to have symbols additional to the colors there, so that colorblind people can play the games too. Right. And back in the days, sometimes you had to push the publishers to acknowledge this at all, that you can improve in stuff like that, because they were not very interested in making the games more accessible. I don't know why. It was the easy route to do it like they did it a couple of years ago, and all the time in the 80s and the 90s. It's so easy to find workarounds. You don't have to use the colors red, yellow, and blue and green. You can use colors in different shades. So the lightness, the brightness of the colors, you can change the brightness of the colors. And we did that in some of my games like Taluva. Taluva is still sold by a French publisher nowadays. And yeah, I think it's important to be open-minded.
Well, and particularly so
topics.
It sounds like you were, at the ground level of the creation of some of these games. So you weren't trying to change an iconic color scheme that may have existed in a game. You're just saying, well, from the get-go, let's do something a little different so we don't create these problems for some of our potential customers.
Yeah, sure. And I think we were quite naive back then, and did not know all the possibilities how to do it. But it was a time when you were exploring what could work and what couldn't, and some approaches sounded fine, but when you got the materials, it was not enough. So you could improve over the years.
So from board gaming, you eventually moved yourself into electronic gaming. So, how did you make that transition?
Yeah. Well, I joined the Coding Monkeys, and it was quite simple to move to electronic gaming because they did Carcassonne on the iPhone. And Carcassonne is a board game, so I was quite familiar with it, and I knew the game designer behind Carcassonne, but I did not do as much on the game itself. I started with Lost Cities, and this is a game by Rainer Knizia, a very famous board game designer, a card game from him, and that is where I wanted to introduce accessibility from the start.
Yeah, and that is a game, for those who may not know, it's a competitive card game. You're trying to score points against your opponent. There's kind of accentuating cards that can kind of boost your score or greatly decrease your score if you don't kind of materialize actually getting the points to go along with that boost. And there's kind of a lot of information to keep track of: what's in your hand, what's already been played, what hasn't been played, what might your opponent have in their hands, which all kind of plays into making sure that you get the highest score, that you have the chance of beating your opponent. And kind of, again, at the end, you guys kind of give a round by round scoring system to show what happened each round, which allows you to kind of change your strategy up for maybe the next time that you play the game. So there's just a lot of information that needs to be communicated to the player to really play that game effectively.
Yeah, and funny enough, we started out again with colorblindness. So we tried some stuff to some shapes, how to differentiate the cards and stuff like that. But it's a little bit ridiculous because my angle into expanding the accessibility for Lost Cities was a little bit selfish, because I always dreamt of a game that I can play in bed after closing my eyes and still playing under the blanket.
I get a lot of work. I get a lot of work done while my wife's sleeping next to me. The lights are all out. I'm watching movies. I'm reading books. I'm answering emails.
Yeah, and that was a fantasy. And in the first, at the first glance, it was ridiculous to turn a complex game like Lost Cities into a game that you can play only by audio. And I thought, if I want to try that, I have to be able to play it. Not only people who are really trained and doing things by audio like you, but even normal people who never had to do everything by audio. But I really wanted to tackle that I can play too.
So you gave yourself a crash course in learning voiceover to kind of be able to do that?
Yeah, I always used the voiceover function in the iPhone because I really like to walk and just hear things and just listen to the text on the screen and not be bothered by reading it. Right. And so I was a big fan of the accessibility options of the iPhone from start.
It kind of has a layer of multitasking ability. I mean, for those who don't need it for accessibility reasons, it just allows you to kind of do multiple things at once, or, as you said, lie in bed and still be able to, do work or play games or do whatever you're doing.
So yeah, that's right. So I didn't just want to do an accessibility option for one demographic, but for all people to enjoy. All people who can hear, because it's just an audio accessibility option. But yeah, that was important for me.
So when you're kind of making that move and you're starting with Lost Cities and you want to make that accessible, I mean, what were really kind of the challenges you found when you're sitting down and trying to actually make that accessible? What was some of the challenges of trying to do that, or what are the components of what did you have to do to make that an accessible game?
First, it was very exciting because back at the time, Apple was really pushing accessibility options, and they were developing stuff, and they gave us the feeling that they really appreciate developers to integrate accessibility options. So I was really eager to look at the framework and what it could do and what it couldn't do. It was good that we didn't plan for that. It was good that the screen had enough space to accommodate accessibility, and we did want to do a little bit several things with gestures and stuff like that. And some of the new functions to group objects and stuff like that were quite good to get a playable prototype. So I think Apple integrated some stuff that made it possible to do it. It was hard to get to know what should the app read out loud and what not. Because you want some information, but you have to keep some information in your head. So the process was that I fed my own dog food. I tried it out. So I on the way from my home to work, I always put Lost Cities on and tried to play. And so yeah. It was my feeling what worked and what did not work.
I imagine, again, since you were kind of at the start of the game, we're thinking about accessibility, that's an easier process than, you're coming in at the end and now we have to kind of ram in or fit in accessibility. So, would that be kind of a correct statement in the games that you've done? And then, since Lost Cities, have you really tackled accessibility right from the start of each of your projects?
It's hard to say. I'm a big fan of accessibility, but it's really hard to do it as a small indie developer because it costs a little, it costs time and it costs money, and you have to have people who appreciate it. I really appreciate that you appreciate it and your community, but it's really hard to invest these costs. And even if you think about it from the start, it costs a lot of time to think about it. So we always decided, depending on the type of game we are making. We did 2 new games in the past 2 years. That was Polarized. That was an app with machine learning about photographing. So we did not put any audio accessibility into it. And the last game was a game that has 500 pictures. These are very important for the game. And we decided not to do accessibility for it because of cost reasons. Because I really believe that you could do accessibility even for those games that are not the perfect games when you have a first glance. But it would be a really interesting task to do it because you have to be very creative. And I think the solutions you would incorporate would be very creative. But it comes down to the cost. Yeah. That's a pity.
Yeah. Do you think the kind of movement of accessibility is progressing in the right way, where it's kind of, developers doing it, where they feel they can do it and where there might be demand for it? Or do you think there should be kind of, governmental oversight to say, look, you really need to make things accessible for everyone? And, some of the, like we have the ADA in the United States, the American Disabilities Act. I don't know if Germany has an equivalent sort of thing, but one of the carve-outs is gaming that actually doesn't fall under the ADA. But do you think it should? So, should there be more, governmental oversight or more rules around inclusion?
I think the direction is right. If you look at games like The Last of Us Part 2 with all these accessibility options, that's really cool. And I really think that big firms should be, they should have to incorporate the accessibility because they can pay for it, and it should be normalized. What we as small developers need is more support. So back then we did Lost Cities and we were really proud about the accessibility, but Apple didn't care at all. And that was a harsh reality to recognize, that you put all your effort into it, and the platform holder does not acknowledge that you did it. I think that is something where we could use more help from the platform holders, like Apple or Google or Sony or Microsoft, that they encourage, maybe finance, maybe just advertise products that have good accessibility.
I know, I think there's a request out to Apple to add an accessibility category under gaming, so that
sure,
you could put Lost Cities under there, and then people would know this is where I can go, because there's so many games that I download where I think, oh, this might be accessible, and find out, oh, it's not. So to have something, this is criteria you have to meet to meet and fit into the accessibility category, and therefore it would give you kind of some advertising, if you will, because people would just know where to go if they want to play an accessible game.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. But I think the small developers need help from outside, because it's really hard to budget these things. And I think they are important, and they are getting more important, and more developers think about it. That's good, that's fine. But if you want to help the cause, funding and financing to especially do accessibility would be good. Even if the state grants for games that do accessibility right, that would be nice.
When you build your games, what software or platform are you building them on?
Oh, a couple. We started out with Xcode and Objective-C, the Apple stuff. Then we switched to Swift with rules. Then the last two games were made in Unity, and now I'm checking out Unreal. So we are all over the place.
Well, so along those lines, like, I know particularly probably those first couple you meant have a little bit more embedded accessibility tool sets in them. Unity, historically hasn't. Some plugins now that seem to be coming in, and Unreal, I have no idea if how useful that tool is for adding accessibility into your game. So, that'd be the kind of right assessment of those platforms, and what can someone like a Unity or maybe an Unreal do to be sure that you can create a game in there, utilizing their software that is accessible.
I would like to start out with Apple, because they are, on one hand, they are fantastic. This accessibility suite is really, really great to build apps. On the other hand, they break it all the time.
Right.
So from year to year, you have your accessibility, and then they change anything, and one function in the app doesn't work anymore, and you get the complaints from the users. I get that they want to complain. That's totally fine. But I think
you're constantly doing maintenance, right?
Having stable accessibility options is very, very important for investing into games and doing the accessibility, because it's really it takes time to do these accessibility options, and if you constantly have to fix them, that will lead developers to not care anymore. And that would be the worst case for everyone. I think Unreal, that's too fresh for me to see what is possible there and what is not. Yeah, I think accessibility options should be at the core of every engine. As you said a couple of minutes ago, it's good to plan from the start to have accessibility options. And if an engine provides that from the start, and you always have alt text and stuff like that in the engine, you will use it. So I think the engine holders they should invest a lot into accessibility and not push it to third-party developers, because third-party developers are nice, but I think it should be an integral part of the engines.
It also seems like it'd be nice if it was standard,
Yeah,
so
sure,
even if you're using a
sure.
different platform, the approach is relatively standard,
Yeah, stuff like changing the controls of a game. It would be so good if that was, everybody would do it and it would be standard. I think Microsoft did something in the new Xbox, but I don't own an Xbox, so I don't know the accessibility options there.
Yeah, I don't do it much on the Xbox, so
Yeah.
or at least haven't in years, I should say. Because I stopped playing console games when I went blind 3 years ago. And really, for me, along those lines, you kind of do your space in mobile gaming. That's kind of the space that I found to be most accessible for me.
Okay.
Really playing a game, and not only playing a game, but playing a game and having that game experience be relatively close to what a sighted person would experience as well. So, I always kind of talk about The Last of Us Part 2. That's a playable game for a blind person, but I think you're kind of having a little bit of a different experience than a sighted person is having with that game. So it's almost like it's two games that are being played, one by the blind community, one by the sighted community. And for me, I wanted to play games that I was having the same experience as the sighted person who's playing that game. So for me, I found, mobile had a good list of accessible games that I could go through. And I know you do stuff in the mobile space, but is that really, you think the easiest place to work in gaming accessibility is on mobile? Does that lend itself to making accessibility a little bit easier than maybe on a console or on a PC?
I really like mobile gaming because it's so personal, because of the touch of the display. And I think this is a good metaphor to use accessibility, because you have a real space in front of you that you can use for accessibility. So I think that's a plus on mobile. And with haptics, I think haptics are great. Yeah. Nowadays, you even can give feedback. I think, that's one of the things. I really would like to patch Lost Cities and put haptics in, but the code base has to be updated, and that's really hard to do several years later. So yeah, I think mobile and accessibility is a good thing, and you said it, because you can make experiences that are quite close. We have one button travel too, and you can get the text. It's a text adventure, and you can read out the text. Let the device read out the text, and use the buttons there. And it's like it's the same experience as reading the text. So I think that's very close. Yeah, I think mobile is very good for that, because most console games focus on the graphics, and it's hard to give you the same experience.
You mentioned one button travel, and you have Lost Cities, two very different games. You have rules in the middle there, also a very different type of game. And I always find it interesting that particularly with indie developers, that they seem to do very different genres, as opposed to just doing, a bunch of different board games or card games and kind of niching into those areas. There's a lot of trying a lot of different things. Is that just, for the challenge of it? Is that, you don't want to get bored? Like, why not just do board game, card games, and just, keep pumping those out and, easily leveraging what you've learned from the previous one into the next one? Why go into different type of genres?
Yeah, my desire to make games was always to encounter new things, to explore and do stuff I've never done before. And that was my motivation to do games at all. And I did it in the board game and card game space too. My games are quite different from another. And I wanted to keep that when I did mobile games, because yeah, that's what's my motivation. That's not the most intelligent thing. You should do the stuff that is most successful and do it over and over again, because that makes money. But yeah, I think I do it for fun too. So that's why, yeah.
When you're taking accessibility, so when you do Lost Cities and you do some accessibility coding and you do that, is it easily to translate what you've learned there into your next game of a different genre, or is it kind of starting from scratch and figuring it all out all over again?
It's easy to translate, but because I switched the engines so often, that was a little bit harder, because you have to read what's even there. What functions can I use? And as I said, Apple is changing the interface too quite often. Stuff like grouping elements and this is sometimes it's hard to do. And timing, because if you read out loud the text, sometimes you get a notification, and there are so many things that can happen on a mobile phone that you don't expect. There's a call, and then what happens after the call? Does the app read all the information again, or stuff like that? So yeah, these are the challenges, but I think it's like all frameworks. If you learned once, you can use it for different stuff.
Now, you got into electronic gaming, and it sounds like you're kind of into the coding part of it, actually doing the coding aspect of it. So did you have a computer programming background? Did you just self-teach yourself? How did you go from board games, which obviously you're doing no coding for that, to electronic and actually doing computer science coding?
Oh, I was always interested in coding, but my level was basic. I coded in BASIC a lot of the early 2000s, and yeah, I think I'm self-taught. I was very interested when the iPhone came around that you can publish your own games. So I started learning to code, and yeah, in the past I was a game designer, and I did illustrations for board games too. So I did a little bit of the graphics side, and I think the code completes the game design journey.
Now, you said, I assume the Coding Monkeys is based in Germany, because that's where you are. And how many people are on the team, working on different aspects of it?
Oh, it fluctuates. Back when we did Lost Cities, I think we were 5 people, and the graphics were done by the Icon Factory. That was a commissioned thing. I did the avatars, and there were people who spoke the tutorial from external people. And what was funny with the Coding Monkeys is that everybody was coding at the Coding Monkeys. So, but we were always interested in stuff like UI and accessibility and onboarding, that the onboarding for games is quite good. So I think we were always interested in multiple aspects of games. But basically, the people were coding monkeys.
Now, when you're creating a game, so I'm a player of games. I'm not a creator of games. The people watching this are most likely players of games, not creators of games. Why don't you give people just a little background of all that it takes from the beginning, to the publishing it out on the Apple Store, and maybe even the steps that go beyond that to really put a game out there. What is all the components that are really involved in doing that you have to consider that people might not really think about?
Well, most important is your prototype phase, where you nail the idea. It depends a lot, because Carcassonne and Lost Cities were established games in the board game sphere, so we didn't have to do that. But with rules or one-button travel or polarized or cards, the last game, it was really important to prototype and try it out and see if it is fun, if you have fun with the game. So that's the first thing. You don't have to think about of the code quality in this phase. You have to think about, is it fun? And if you say it is fun, then the next phase begins. So you have to lay out how do I want to have the interaction? How do I want to teach the game to players? And that was what we did with Lost Cities. There was a big session, how to bring this game onto a small screen. Where are the elements? What are the elements of the game at all? Do you want to stay in the game? In Lost Cities, we wanted the players to stay in the game all the time if they want. Even after a game, you can continue playing the next one if you want to do that. And then you have to think about menus. Menus are a big part of doing mobile games and games at all. It's not the most fun part of doing games, but you have to think about it. You have to have all the accessibility options. You have to manipulate the volume and stuff like that, starting a new game, continuing a game, stuff like that. It was very important for us to think about Lost Cities is a two-player game, but you can play several sessions at once. How the experience of switching sessions is, stuff like that. So this is a core part at the beginning of doing a mobile game, thinking about the UI, the experience, and how stuff works. And then you start to build content, depends on the game. A text adventure is mostly about content. A game like Lost Cities is mostly about stitching the pieces together.
Yeah, maybe some of the AI differences.
The AI in Lost Cities, that was a fun part of doing the game, because we split it between Toby and me. So we had two designers who did the UI, the AI, and we were competing. I did two AIs and he did two AIs, and we always wanted to be better than the other guy and make a better AI. And in the mornings we were in the office and programming the AIs, and after office we were playing against the AIs and seeing which one is better. That was a really fun process to do.
With the AI, how do you do? Because I imagine with a computer, you can optimize everything to get the perfect hard one that's going to be nearly impossible to beat because it never makes mistakes. How do you do someone who's an easier opponent? Do you just inherently write code for it to make a mistake? How do you?
Oh no, that was not necessary.
Every once in a while, pick the wrong thing. Like.
Okay, we are now in the age of machine learning, but back then when we did Lost Cities, you had the Monte Carlo method and stuff like that, but that was out of reach. So we had we did not train the AI back then. We had to think about it and write it. So I think Ms. Lindenbrock, who is the easiest AI in Lost Cities, is one of the harder AIs, but stripped down. She does everything that obviously makes sense.
Mhm.
So yeah, she tries to avoid obvious mistakes, but she does not more than that. She doesn't think much into the future. But that is very important. If you make an easy AI, that's okay, but it doesn't have to be dumb. It does have to conform to the most obvious things. Because if you say, oh, that doesn't make sense. Why is she playing a 10 at her as her first card? That doesn't make sense.
Right.
Then you think, oh, and that's a bad AI. But she doesn't have to be bad. She has to be easy. So that was the approach with Miss Lindenberg.
Gotcha. What about on the, you've published the game. How are you getting the word out about your games?
You always try to cater to Apple, so they feature your game.
Right.
So making good graphics, making good UI, making it accessible and stuff like that. I think Apple was very keen to feature those games back in the days. And having a feature by Apple went a long way. And we use social media a lot. What was working quite good was Twitter back then. So you could tweet directly out of the app. That is a little bit harder nowadays because you have the share sheet on the iPhone, and it's harder to compose a tweet and do all the stuff to get it out. And it's not very common anymore that people tweet out their results of the game.
Right.
But in 2013, 2014, that was really common. I remember a phase where all my mentions on Twitter were full of little screenshots of threes. And that's where I learned about this game. That was a method. Yeah, I think social media is still an important thing, but the whole game shifted to free-to-play games, and they were completely different. They were completely different internally, and they were completely different depending ads, because they buy ads on YouTube and on social media and on other games.
And along those lines, since you kind of mentioned the model of pricing, how do you decide the pricing of your games? How do you evaluate that as someone to say, you know what, I think this is a $2.99 game versus a $5.99 game? Like, how do you come up with what you think this game is worth and what you think the public would be willing to pay for it? Or, if you're not going to do a straight up price, going episodic or going, with microtransactions, how do you decide which way you're going to go and what price you're going to set for things?
Yeah, we tried a lot. I think the deal in the early phase of the iPhone was the prices are really cheap compared to video games or PC games. But that's okay because there are so many people who buy games, and then it works. We always try to make prices that get us the money back so we can do more games.
Sure.
But that gets harder and harder nowadays.
That just from the volume of games that are coming out, that now you are competing with, maybe 100 games came out a day back in 2013, but now 1,000 games come out a day in 2022?
That's part of it, but I think the shift to free-to-play is much more important for the decline of paid games and the decline of the sales figures. The focus is on free games today, and I think that's the main reason that mobile games are not that sustainable anymore. And what was very interesting a couple of years ago was if you price your game $2, you sell more than if you price it $3, but in the end, roughly you get an equivalent amount of money.
Right.
So yeah, I think we went with the flow, we went with the market, and we tried to assess how much money did we put into a game. Is it a small game or is it a big game, and then work around that. But it was always a gut feeling doing the prices.
Can you go out, like, let's say you put out, I don't even remember what Lost Cities was, but let's just say Lost Cities was $4.99. Can you go out in 2022 and say it's the 10-year anniversary of Lost Cities, it's on sale for $1.99, and be able to change that easily enough in Apple, and then go post that to all your social medias and do that way? Or are you kind of locked into whatever price that you've put out there originally?
I think sales are fine, but it's really hard to get the voice out to tell people about them. That is very different to the PC and console market that is really driven by sales. But doing sales, yeah, nobody knows about the sales, so it doesn't really matter if you do sales anymore. Not really. You can do them if you have an anniversary, but how to reach people? It always boils down to the question how to reach people. If sales would work, we would do sales more often. But yeah, if you make it free for a day or two, you get an amount of people who look at the app, but it goes back very, very soon, one day after the sale or stuff like that. So it doesn't really matter to make sales nowadays.
And along those lines, for like sales trends, if you put out a game today, are you going to see, the majority of your sales in the first 3 months or 6 months, and then it's just trickling in after that, just, someone who might stumble across it? Or is it pretty steady, for a long period of time? Like, how does that sales influx come in?
You make the most money in the first week or two, and then it drops fairly quickly to the bottom line where it stays, and then it's quite constant over the years. Sometimes sales get better again, and I don't know why. Maybe I have to do something with featuring, but it's hard to know for sure. But yeah, featuring is still the thing that influences the sales most, and I think that's why you sell the most in the first week.
So when you create all of these different games that you've done, I mean, what is the thing that gives you the greatest satisfaction of it? Is it just, hey, I've put a game out there and it's out there in the world? Is that what gives you satisfaction? Is it, hearing feedback from customers? Is it, seeing great sales numbers? What, how do you kind of deem what is success for a game that you've put out, and how you feel about that game?
Sales numbers are important for the feeling, hey, I can keep doing what I'm doing.
Right.
But the most satisfaction comes out of, yeah, people who tell you their feelings about the game. People who enjoy stuff in your game, and maybe particular they enjoy the music or the gameplay or Miss Lindbrock or something. It doesn't matter what, but hearing from people is very, very satisfying. And I love reading reviews. It's not that nice if the reviews are bad, but hearing back is the best thing of all the things that come when you do a game, because yeah, I want to have feedback. I really love to talk about games. When I am playing, I want to talk with other people about games, what I liked and what I did not like. And that's the same for me when other people play my game. What I really love to do is being there when other people play my game, and get to know how they react and what they like and what they don't like, and see them playing. Yeah.
So, as we've kind of been talking about accessibility and gaming, I mean, what do you think is the biggest roadblock to getting more accessibility in more games? Is it just some games are not made for accessibility, as you were kind of discussing before? Is it people don't start early enough and thinking about accessibility in their game design? Is it financial, which you mentioned before? I mean, what do you think is really the biggest roadblock to getting accessibility to be, more mainstream and considered, across more games?
I think when there are no budget restrictions, I think budget restrictions are a main blocker.
Mhm.
But for bigger companies, the awareness, I think if they are aware that accessibility is important, then they will put it in. And raising the awareness is one of the crucial things to get more accessibility. And solving the financial problems for indie developers is another goalpost that we have to reach.
So what can we do as, gamers who are looking for accessibility in games? What do you think we can do to help mitigate some of those roadblocks that are out there?
Let the developers know, let the people who worked on the games know, and let them know that you care. I always got good feedback from you and your community, and that was, well, sometimes one email that I get is the reason that I think about it and put accessibility in the next game, because I want to, I want to be that guy that does it. And I think, being loud is crucial and the key for getting heard here. And games are made by people, and I think you can reach these people and talk to them. And not only the companies going through the companies is important, but going through the real developers, the persons who work on the games is important too.
Regarding accessibility, what is kind of, your vision of the future of what gaming accessibility can be?
I have to say, I'm surprised how I'm surprised about the discussions in the last 2-3 years about accessibility. I think it's getting mainstream to find it important, to think about it, that it is important. But to be honest, if you have enough resources and time, accessibility can be so much. You can pour so much resources into it and do fancy stuff and ridiculous stuff with accessibility. I think there's no end, and to be reasonable is the task of the companies.
Sure. Yeah.
But I think you can do stuff that is, and alone the imagination that I could switch on my console and play games and play every game that I want to play without looking, and just with audio, that would be fantastic for me too, because I think it's a completely different experience to do that, and it's so fascinating. It's like VR. Like VR is another way to experience games. Experience games by audio is another experience too. And you have to see that as the game consoles and gaming advances, there are advancements in technologies too. 3D audio. On iPhone 3D audio and on consoles 3D audio, you can use that for accessibility too. So the possibilities are really great for the future.
Yeah, I haven't
And
really.
haptics, I talked about haptics too. You did not have that 10 years ago, but now you can use it for stuff like that. So if we have the motivation, if we have the awareness, and if we have the budget, then there is a really good future for accessibility.
Yeah, I've appreciated, as you said, the haptics of, being used as a way to communicate information that other people might be getting visually, and then, along with the sound, really kind of the 3D sound design that you can have, coming from the phone with a set of headsets, to really create a three-dimensional space. I mean, that's come a long way over the last, 5-10 years of really kind of creating good sound design that creates, a really conceptual world using sound only.
Yeah.
So what is the next accessible game that you might be putting out that we can look forward to?
I am working on a new prototype. It's a game about inventing games, and it is it is a really interesting thought how to put accessibility in there and which accessibility options. But as it is a game about designing games, I think accessibility will be at its core too, because you have to think about it as a game developer.
Right.
To be honest, I don't know, but it's very interesting field to think about that and to think about it early. As I told you, I'm looking into Unreal, and I will be looking into the accessibility options there. I don't know if there are any and what options I have, but I'm curious.
How long does it, so if you're just kind of at the beginning thought process of a game, from that beginning thought process to publishing a game out on, Android or Apple, how long does that usually take you? Is it, months, years?
On mobile, I think usually between 3 months, that is very, very short, and a year or a year and a half. Yeah, well, sometimes a year and a half. It depends on so many things. It's really hard to access at the beginning of the process because you don't know all the roadblocks. It depends on, do you have a game with a lot of content, like the story in One Button Travel, or the pictures in cards, or do you have a game that is more mechanical, like the card games or rules? But I think realistically 6 months to 1.5 years for a mobile game. Yeah.
Do you have a target? Like, are you looking to get at least a game a year out there, just, to be able to, generate revenue and keep the lights going? Like, is there a target of how many games you need to kind of really keep in the mill in order to keep the lights on?
Yeah, with mobile games, I said, yeah, one game a year is a good thing. I think the next project will be a little bit bigger, and it's not completely clear if it will be on mobile. We are looking into several different options at the moment. Yeah, but I think for a mobile game, doing one game a year is a good thing because you can pour so much time into one project, and
Sure.
when it fails, that's too risky.
Right, sure. Well, Marcel, thank you so much for coming on to the interview series and telling us, your kind of process of creating accessibility in games and your journey through game development, and, your thoughts and visions about what accessibility can be. So I really appreciate you taking the time. You've shared some of your social media links with me, which I will be putting in the description of this video. So everybody who's listening, please check out the items that Marcel's doing and the Coding Monkeys are doing, and follow them on Twitter and all their social media so you can be up to date when they have new games come out. And again, I really do appreciate the time that you took to speak with me this evening.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was a really joy, and yeah, I'm very curious what the future may bring, and what accessibility options we will have in 10 years.
Well, hopefully it'll be as as fruitful as the last 10 years. I think we've come a long way in the last 10 years. So hopefully the next 10 years we keep up that momentum.
Yeah, hopefully. Thanks.
Thank you very much.